Hi, I'm Angus if you don't know me, last name Mackie. I'll jokingly say the Mackie and Machiavellian. We'll do that one. Today I'll be speaking about voting patterns and analysis, particularly in regards to Australia. There is a bit of stuff touching on America because I couldn't find decent enough sources in an Australian context. So yeah, next slide please, sir. Voting analysis, so pretty much I'll be going through what it's referred to within as a study, psephology. I'll then go into the two-party preferred model, then mapping elections. Lots of maps, there's way too many to show how people vote. Polling for issues, oh, that one should be down one. Never mind, down to tally model. I love this model. It's a nice graph which says a lot, but it's completely flawed but useful. I'll get to that later. Then I'll go into a bit on asylum seekers, the Tasmanian election, and there should be a bit on Western Australia there, and the Australian political climate as a whole at the end. Okay, next slide please. Psephology translate to the study of pebbles. While voting may not necessarily seem to connect with pebbles initially, classically when the Greeks, Athenians voted, they used pebbles as ballots, so they dropped a pebble into a bag and that would be a vote for the candidate associated with that bag. There you go, psephology. Pretty much it's based in statistics and quantitative research. Lots of numbers, which has all the additional implied issues such as make sure you're using random sources for your voting and whatnot. Polls, usually if they're decent, will say that they've had a random selection, or if they're being honest like the House of Reps with a fair few of their polls. This is not a scientific poll is what they call it, because it's only voluntary people voting as opposed to randomised. So that's where they put a poll out online or somewhere and people can vote if they want. The issue with that is that if it's not random, it'll tend towards what the American political system does and only get people who are interested enough to look up the issue. So you get far more skewed results which aren't an accurate representation of reality, which is pretty much why you should avoid Google. Do not use any Google stats, because all of their stats come from their searches and other stuff that they've gathered from looking at people searching in certain areas, which is fine if you're looking at what Google gets access to, but again, that's all people voluntarily going online and searching stuff up. I don't have it here, but there was a nice graphic I saw of people searching up Senator Ludlam. It was like perhaps up to about 30-something votes a day until his speech, and it shot up to over 250,000 searches a day. Yeah, so completely bad idea to use Google Stats. Going back into the message, next slide please. This is the two-party preferred graph. It pretty much focuses on the major two parties, so it's good in the sense that it's looking at how popular the major two parties are, which is important in most democracies because those are your two real options for who's going to be governing. This is in, I would say, more your Westminster style system, where you have a focus on, the system is focused towards having two parties and then minor parties aren't really helped. But in more proportional systems, you have an issue with a lot of small parties getting in. For instance, Italy, their current government is a coalition of 6 different parties with wildly varying policy bases, which can be an issue for governing, although it's, in an ideological sense, more democratic. So, here's one for recently two-party preferred. You've got a nice instance here where we started having a whole heap of broadcasts and whatnot about Manus Islands. You can see a nice trend down below the 50 line, the 50-50 line after that occurred for the coalition. Next slide, please. Yep, Mackerras pendulum is pretty much how people construct it. This is based on a guy, Malcolm Mackerras. He's an Australian psephologist, and so he came up with this in order to establish a two-party preferred vote based upon people ordering preferences of what party they prefer the most. That is slightly better in how it is somewhat more representative of how people vote. It follows our fund system with voting below the line somewhat in that sense. So pretty much count votes post choices, you follow that until you have only 2 parties remaining, each percentage, that gives you a percentage of votes overall. It's, again, the issue is it's just focused on looking at what the governing party is most likely going to be like within the next election or two, because there's very little trend outside that line. Next slide, please. Mapping elections. There are a variety of methods. We've got a very simple Pressy map, which is where they show the country and areas and whatnot, and they just colour in who's won that district according to the colour. It's very popular to use red versus blue, just because as a society we like to use red versus blue. And then there's a various other ones I'll walk through in a second. Next slide, please. This is your standard Pressy map. It is an utter nightmare for Australia because we are big, and as you'll see later, this is the important part of Australia according to how we vote. Everywhere else is nah. So, as you can see, lots of colours. They have coloured according to that. Interestingly, those aren't actual green places. Those are the nationals, which is also the colour they had at first. We're going to get it. Greens are still currently listed under the independents, and that's the country Liberal Party, which is something the NT runs. Next slide, please. Here is a cartogram of Australia. This is Australia resized according to the significance of the vote. Remember when I said that part was significant? That's that. Melbourne is almost a quarter of Australia at that point. So this is important because it actually tells us why politicians will campaign more in certain areas. That area is around about Western Sydney and Brisbane. So again, when that's taking up that much, and it's actually a swing state. Swing states being, swing areas, sorry, electorates being places when they vote, there's very little margin between the major 2 parties. You can also include minor parties in that. That complicates it because, again, this is primarily based on the 2-party system. So if it's in lesser margin than, say, about 5 votes either way, it's considered a swing state. Beyond that, it's a safe seat because you've had a significant amount of support for you in that area. Hume, because I keep betting on that, because that's where I'm from, has only recently dipped below 60% towards the Liberals in the past 30 years. They've held that seat for 30 years, and you have more change coming from the person representing you in the party. So that's a side note. Next one, please. 3D map. This is a fun one, which is a result of Americans spending way too much money on their elections. Because they have more money, you can come up with more interesting ideas. This is generally what happens when you have more money. This one's quite interesting because it uses a lot of purple to show swing areas and areas which aren't locked up. You do have that definite red heart, which is similar to Australia. Again, rural areas. It says something about them. And what's interesting, like the amount of each, so it's proportional to show how significant certain areas are. So you have a very unsubtle Democrat support up in the northeast from the oversized lines there. That would pretty much be New York. Next slide, please. Pointer list. This is, again, another interesting thing coming out of 2012 in the US. Each of those dots is 100 votes towards a certain party. So, again, it shows you which areas are focused towards certain things, and when you can see concise colours like red, you can definitely tell that is a Republican area. Vice versa, this area doesn't have much blue in it, aside from the occasional point here and there. Again, the American South. Next one, please. This is pointless light. It takes that idea but reduces it to electorates. It still, again, shows you the significance within Australia of the southeast. It's a bit in Perth, near Perth, but again, not very significant. other areas of Australia aren't as significant, which again tells you how parties operate. They focus on urban areas, which can be good or bad. Yep, pretty much that. Next one, the downside tally model. Interesting model. It shows here, this being the electorate, the amount of voters there are. This applies far more to systems where there is mandatory voting or exceedingly high turnout. That's because following the law of large numbers, that's what my lecture it's called, statistics idea. The more and more you add on, the more the bell curve is going to form. So you'll generally form a more average idea, which is generally one reason why people say mandatory voting is a good idea, because it forces a country to go to a centrist perspective because there's more votes in the middle. That's the base assumption within the median voter theory, which, as you can see from here, you'll have to the left, more left-wing views, to the right, more conservative right-wing views. That is based on the assumption that the left-right axis is accurate, which is something could become an entire another lecture, extended that to a book even. Yeah. So, on this left-right axis, from polling people, in a random sense, or you go from elections, you'll generally form this bell curve. You'll find that policies and parties will try and aim for the middle in order to prevent the other half from getting over to this half and getting a majority, and also seeking to capture as much of the electorate for themselves. Now, this one assumes that you have a centrist electorate. However, as I'll show later with some issues, if it trends over to the right, you will see everyone moving over to the right. If it's over to the left, people will move across to the left in order to chase votes. This is parties not driving policy, reacting to the populace with policy. That's how I see it anyway. It's interesting. That can be made up by media. Now, this is generally down along here based upon single or primary issues. So, with our recent elections, that would have primarily been the economy and refugees. We'll get on to that later. Next. It's like these. Again, so you constructed a single major issue campaign. In order to construct that, you need to focus on a single issue. So it's foolhardy to go and say which party you prefer and construct it from that. You need to say, do you support, say, kicking out refugees, etc. Next slide, please. Single issues, that's it. That's the big thing. The issue within Australia, particularly, as covered in Vogonomics, which is a somewhat interesting book, you can't really categorise Australians as left-right due to the way it classifies Bogans is middle class to middle and lower class. It stands it a fair bit, but the way it categorises Australians is they want as much from the government themselves, which would suggest left-leaning policies, but none for other people, which again suggests right thing. So you've got selfish people, which is almost a Hobbesian model of self-interested individuals driving stuff, and which is one of the reasons, particularly in Australia and other countries to other extents, that there's a collapse of the left-right paradigm. Australia uses psephologists use it because it's simple and it just that left-right leaning of voters is expressed through the news cycle and what the news cycle is focusing on. So when, say, the media focuses a lot on asylum seekers and how they're stealing jobs and what's else, including those 457 visa people, you'll find a general trend within Australia leaning towards the right, which would suggest the general trend towards the right that we're currently experiencing, where both major parties went to the right in saying, yes, we want to make sure the asylum seekers aren't here. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is again coming on to the significant election issues. This was 2013. From Vote Compass, again, slightly skewed, but the amount of numbers they collected means the theory of large numbers balances out the not so random method these statistics are carried out. The economy by a long shot was the primary issue for the last election, which is why you saw both parties talking a lot about the economy and saying how they're going to be the best for the economy. Next slide, please. Looking at asylum seekers now. So, here, this is a poll done by the Lowy Institute in 2013, prior to the election, and it generally shows that the people polled were far more in favour of making sure the votes were turned back than those who were out of favour. We go to the next slide. It's being graphed. So there's just disagree and agree. You can see there is a massive amount of people compared to those who disagree with the policies of turning back votes compared to those who generally support it.
And Mackie tries fairly hard not to lean more or left. Their methoding isn't always wonderful, but they do try at least.
So that line there, that is at the 66% of the voting base were in favour of turning back the votes, which is why you saw both Liberal and Labor being massively in favour of turning back the votes. It's not that because it was a major issue within the media at that point. So going back to the downside telling, we've got line across there. You've got that massive lodge to the left. So you had both parties competing in this area. Interesting thing, which relates more to the prisoner's dilemma, that left this space over here to be capitalised by the Green Party, which to an extent saw some increase in their numbers overall, but loss in seats due to how our electoral system works. Next slide, please. That previous one was done in 2009. This one was done in 2013, showing that it's a continuous issue, which is why it's continued to be maintained in the media, therefore a continuous issue for politics. Next slide, please. Okay, coming down to the Tasmanian elections now. Here's the current, these were put out, Reachtel, not Newscall, my bad. So they've done some polling of Tasmania at the moment, and particularly in regards to the Greens' control of that area at the moment, there is generally, within the media, it's accepted that there has been a decline in logging jobs through Greens' programs. So you've seen a massive rise of Liberals because they haven't been associated with them. So at this point, Liberal National Party is a sneeze away from winning Tasmania on the 15th of April. Huh?
Is that primary vote?
Yes.
Primary vote should not be above 40%.
So, interesting bit here is the Palmer United Party. They are ridiculous.
Is that likely a none of the above option? Because the Greens no longer really fit a none of the above. They're considered as having policies, which means people don't like them anymore.
I'll get to that later, I've got it covered in another slide. But Palmer United, at this point within Tasmania, South Australia, and the Western Australian Senate election, is a wild card. It was on the back of the Palmer United Party that Ludlam got re-elected recently into the Senate, and a few of the other Green seats around the place was as a result of what Palmer United giving them preferences over other parties, say the Liberals, which is interesting given their haphazard selection of policies from both left and right of arc, which is why they're hard to account for. They're the wild card. Next slide, please. So, same-sex marriage, here's some nice numbers on it. While obviously the biggest thing that most people focus on is here, the general support of it, we can slip to the next slide. That, I think, is far more significant in terms of the Liberal Party, because you can say that the against people, from some other slides, which I couldn't actually get onto here, show that those were all generally based within the Liberal Party. You have a core vote of 36% of the population voting not in favour of gay marriage. That, when halved roughly, just going with some rough stuff, because you've got the two major parties for and against, That doubles to just under around the 65, 70 mark, which is why you have seen the Liberal Party not supporting a conscience vote. They have that solid core which they don't want to alienate. That is something that the Democrats in America did through the 50s and 60s as they moved towards the left, which is where you have the spectrum jump of the Republicans in order to snap up the Southern vote. Next slide, please. So, Western Australian Senate election. A few interesting things have been happening with that. Big thing which put it on the map was Ludlam's speech. Again, as I mentioned previously, the massive jump in searches for him after his anti-Abbott rant has net the Greens a fair amount of support nationwide, which has been important because in order to fund their campaign, because comparatively after the recent election, most parties are light on the amount of funds they have. So that spiking up the amount of support for the Greens has been important in their pledge drives and getting monetary support from varying members of the public. And it's also, so generally anti-Abbott, there was some points in that which, like the big one here that I focused on was that he stated every time Abbott spoke, more people started voting Green. Jumping back to the Dance Hotelling model. So, bit back. Yep. So, we can say that the Liberals are fairly on the right, or sort of leaning towards the right. Greens are over here, and in the middle you've got Labor. People tend to not complete spectrum jump. They move along the spectrum slowly. So, Abbott speaking, and people not liking the Liberals anymore, drives people generally to Labor. But support for the Greens would be coming from the left of Labor. That would generally be people more in favour of the Fabian Society, members of that, / general supporters of the policies which come out of that institution. Fabian Society being one of the two major groups within the Labor Party, them and the unions being the two wings of the Labor Party. So, in that sense, Ludlam's statement that voters are jumping from the Liberals to the Greens is generally seen as inaccurate, given people don't do extreme spectrum jumps. Students being the exception. Abbott came out with a fantastic comment in response that the Greens and Labor were essentially one party. That is grossly inaccurate. Grossly inaccurate. Whereas the Liberals and the Nationals, they focus with their coalition on working together. How that resolves in terms of voting is that when they're going through pre-selections within the party structure, they have agreements with the Liberals and Nationals have an agreement to not compete with one another. They say, if you want to vote for our policy, vote for my compatriot in this area. That means they aren't competing, which means that they're operating in the fun area of the prisoner's dilemma. Prisoner's dilemma being an idea from game theory, which is there's two prisoners in a cell. In separate cells. There's evidence against them, but not enough. So they are offered by the constabulary. If they inform on the other person, they will be let free. That leads to anyone of these works?
Yeah.
Okay. A nice graph where it's so if they both don't rat, they'll get 2 years. 2. If one of if A that's our instruction. So if I did it wrong. My bad. So this block you've got them not ratting on one another, so they both receive 2 years. In this one, you've got prisoner A decides to be nice and not rat on prisoner B, but prisoner B rats on prisoner A. So prisoner B gets 0 years. Prisoner A gets 3 years. Prisoner B gets 0 years. Same in reverse up here. If they both rat on one another, it's 3 for each of them. So, in the sense that that is a single instance issue. That's prisoner's dilemma in a single instance. So that's then only happening once. In the iterated prisoner's dilemma, this is happening, say, week after week, and you swap around 3 years for, say, extra punishment. In this sense, when taking it to politics, you have essentially Liberals and Nationals there at that point. Neither of them are ratting on each other by not competing with one another. They're collaborating, and that way they're able to operate well with one another, which is why they're generally referred to as the coalition, and generally don't separate. Up in Queensland, they're just the one party now, and Northern Territory to an extent, different party structure ideas slightly. But you have had an issue where the Greens have been going with against Labor and running against them in the same electorates. This is taking away from the Labor vote and moving it to the Green vote, which is why you saw after Shorten got in, the Greens-Labor alliance was kind of severed, and particularly in regards to Western Australia now, the Greens have been moved down significantly in terms of Labor's preferences. This is majorly important because Senator Ludlam got in on about 5% of the primary vote. Most of his votes came from Labor's secondary preference. Because they've been moved down significantly, it's going to be a far larger issue for them for Ludlam to get back in without this support which he is going to get. Which is why they went out with this large speech in order to generate money in order to campaign harder. Something that the other parties do.
So what you're saying is that in this graph, that 18% from the Greens used to be Labor.
It applies nationally. In this one, you've seen this primary vote of 18% was a lot lower initially until people started moving over from Labor to vote Greens, which sits within on the political spectrum and is completely democratic. Within a party system, they're undercutting Labor, which is an issue because you have this conflict on the left, which has meant they're disorganised and not focusing on the left-right conflict, which is generally what's focused on within elections. Palmer United is again the wild card. Interestingly, within Western Australia, while Ludlam had a fair amount of preferences from Labor, it was because of the Palmer United Party that Ludlam got in the end. That got them just over the line to beat the independent party, which I cannot remember the name of. I believe it's the Sex Party. I'm not entirely sure. So you can blame the Palmer United Party on not having voted in the Sex Party.
I knew I had that party.
Onwards?
Yep.
Cool. Good fun.
Yep. So, so that was Abbott's response, and helping the Greens in the way. So pretty much, we'll come to the end, wrap up with the Australian political climate. We've seen a swing to the right, particularly in regards to the economy. That has been a swing to the right because the Liberal brand is that they can deal with economic issues far better than Labor can. Again, asylum seekers, people generally don't like them on the whole, which has meant that in regards where there was a lot of people strongly agreeing with getting rid of them, the Liberals having the stronger policy out of them and Labor, they netted more votes from that. Primary two issues. It's not as noticeable, the rise of the Australian Tea Party. This has been happening in the background at the moment. There are more and more Liberal sources of news and whatnot broadcasting Tea Party propaganda. It's incremental at this point, quite minor, but you are seeing the rise of the Australian Tea Party at the moment. Well, going down the libertarian, following the libertarian ideals, so going back to classical liberalism, but going to a more extreme standpoint than the Liberals have previously held on it. So getting rid of government funding for everything, which currently meshes with current government policies at points, but it doesn't have the same influence as in America, where if you don't have the Tea Party support within the Republicans, you don't have support. It isn't to that extent yet, but it's on the rise. With the Australian Tea Party website, it's a combined network between Australia and America. So with the amount of posts that they're doing, it's an international movement. So they'll go between shifts. Volunteers posting up propaganda through their website, which is showing that they're organising, and it's somewhat disconcerting that you could possibly see the Liberal Party go more towards the Republican Party. Heading to the left, this is the conflict between the Greens and Labor. Currently, one of them's people have been predicting the decline of either. This is because they're loggerheads. Within the downswing tally model, parties within the centre generally collapse in short order as both parties either side of them move towards the middle, and that's where Labor currently finds itself. It's in the centre because it moved over right massively in order to net all the right-wing voters that they found within the last two elections, and as a result of that, they've left the left vacant for the rise of the Greens. Now, there's an issue between which one is going to take over the banner as the leader of the left, in a colloquial sense. So, is it will be moving the more neoliberal style that the Greens have going? That's an ideological sense, not neoliberal party. Which is, there's some similarities, which is why they have been able to incorporate previously. Or is Labor going to reassert its brand as being left? That I can't predict currently. I don't have enough information, and I'm not invested enough within the study yet to do that. Again, focused on the economy, that's why you've seen this trend to the right. Most polling places, including the ABC, are predicting that Liberals are going to be winning both Tasmania and South Australia in significant proportions. Landslide victories. Farm United Party is only significant because it has that monetary backing. It's a wild card currently. When it establishes a policy base, you'll be able to tell where it is on the spectrum, but it's currently all over the place, which means the downside telling model can't compete with it, because following that Australian trend, in order that Australian voters, you can't place it somewhere. Or you place half the party here, half the party there, which again doesn't really work. And yeah, thanks for listening to me ramble on about voting.
Which way what do you think the outcome's going to be of the WA election?
Can I ask
Well,
a related question? Because the last WA election in minor parties kind of
Yep.
I think that is going to happen this time. Maybe that.
I think they received enough bad press from the major four parties, Labor and Green, that it's either you're going to get people listening to that and moving their votes away from them, or in more probably what's going to happen within Australia, it's going to reinforce their vote. Like, currently it's the core voters who are extremely catered to these groups. You may see a rise in it as almost a protest vote, because the media's being that loud. It's like, oh, the ruling parties don't like this lot, let's support them.
Yeah, that protest vote thing is almost unique to Australia.
Yep.
Very odd process. We basically, when we're pissed off with our politicians, which is reasonably frequently, we tend to either first preference or even all the way down the line just say anyone but the following, which usually results in a big spike in the vote of some minor party, whichever minor party gets the last state preferences. But subsequent elections don't repeat that, because we go, holy shit, we almost elected the wild Christians, or holy shit, we almost elected the communists. Let's go back to normality.
Claire, I honestly think that Palmer's going to see an increase in vote, especially with his antics down in Tasmania. That shit's hilarious.
What, Sam?
He's like a clean-shaven Australian Santa Claus, that man.
Yeah.
Just keeps on giving.
Today, as part of the political campaign, he was down there in a bouncy castle. And there's a minute-long video of him with one of the candidates from the Palm United Party down there in the bouncing castle with him. And these are both quite large gentlemen.
That's more jiggling than anyone wants.
And I do find Palmer kind of objectionable as a politician, but I so hope his party turns out to have something I like so I can justify voting him in, because he's hilarious.
Is that supposed to be like some sort of symbolic thing about his platform?
You know, jumping castle.
All over the place.
I'm not all over the place and absolutely disgusting to look at.
Yeah, no, his policies jiggle too.
It was broadcast as a media stunt. I think it's hit the donkey voter in Australia amazingly.
That's what
It's like, this guy's fucking hilarious. I'm voting for him for more antics.
That's the other thing that Australians do. And this one you also see in Canada. Like Rob Ford, the mayor of Toronto. That man is untouchable in an election because he's so funny, but Toronto just won't get rid of him.
Do you
Australia,
actually think Toronto wouldn't get rid of him?
they've re-elected him
They've
repeatedly.
re-elected him numerous times.
People like,
Even with
Even
class
previously,
antics.
people did know about his antics. It's just more public now.
Yeah,
America picked up on it.
Yeah,
basically, we like stupid, crazy people, that larrikin thing.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Rob Catter could have gotten away with it too if it weren't with him opening his mouth.
No, he can still get away with it with him
the
voting.
same as Canada.
Cat
issue that the issue
Palmer's
with-
a shrewd politician.
Oh,
Cat is quite shrewd. He's targeting the rural vote as being, like, he's competing with the national wing of the Lib Nats because having left them, he feels that they're too committed to working within the coalition to actively represent people. Now, what has been interesting, like over the past month, if it wasn't for Canada, there wouldn't have been that money sent out to drought-affected Queenslander farmers. He kicked up that much of a stink. That is going to drive his vote back towards the safe area. Because recently, after supporting the Labour Party, it's somewhat of a no-no for a rural electorate for an independent to go that way. He didn't justify it properly, which is where there was this different guy up in Northern Territory who, when the Labour Party lost a few people to jail because there was that much questionable actions going on, he signed up with them as a result to form a coalition. He effectively pulled what the independents did in the 2010 Parliament. He did the later stage. But what he did compared to Catter, he got a short essay he wrote out on why he did that on the front page of the Northern Territory newspaper. He was able to justify why he did it, and it made sense to his support base, which drove his support up. Catter didn't do that effectively, probably partially because he was drowned out in terms of who was supporting him. In terms of the national media, he wasn't able to get enough coverage to get his message why he did that out. Which is why he saw his seat moved into swing territory. He only got 54% of the vote.
On a side note, the Northern Territory paper was hilarious.
Oh,
Yes.
Just
But what Angus is talking about raises a very good point. You can't talk about a single Australian electorate. Catter, Barnaby Joyce, people like that, they look ridiculous when you poll in inner city.
Yeah.
Their policies seem out of line, decades behind, and they look like they are silly and out of touch talking about that. Within their own electorates, they poll really strongly. They are representing the views of their electorate really well. So though I will never agree with the single word out of Catter's mouth, I have enormous respect for him.